Welcome to Masters and Volz, the Business of Politics, a weekly video podcast which brings you guests who work to elect candidates to office and influence lawmakers. Whether we like it or not, politics is a business. It takes money, people, and organization to win elections and shape public policy. I'm Merrick Masters, here today with my co-host Bill Volz to interview Mark Brewer, who is the former head of the Michigan Democratic Party, having served in that position from 1995 to 2013. I believe he has been the longest serving person in this position. Bill, say hello to our audience before I introduce Mark.
Hi, Bill Volz here. Looking forward to chatting with our guests today.
Mark Brewer, to give you a little bit of an introduction, has had a distinguished career in politics and public service. He practices law with Goodman Hecker, located in the Metro Detroit area. Mark graduated from Harvard College and Stanford Law School. He practices law in the areas of union-side labor law, elections, campaign finance, and nonprofit law. His family roots has union members, farmers, and veterans inform his legal practice. Mark has done extensive pro bono work for such organizations as the Michigan ACLU and the Michigan League of Women Voters. Mark is also a podcaster, co-hosting a weekly podcast with the former executive director of the Republican Party, Jeff Timmer, titled "The Republic If You Can Keep It." Welcome, Mark. And now I'll turn things over to Bill, who will start the interview.
Welcome, Mark, again. I thought a good way to begin our chat today would have you talk a little bit about your political journey to the position of being chair of the Michigan Democratic Party.
Thanks for that question, Bill and Merrick, and thank you for inviting me to be a guest on your podcast. I was always interested in politics, watched politics. We lived in the Chicago area, for example, during the 1968 Democratic Convention. I saw the tumult around that convention on TV. I was involved in student politics at my high school, student council president, those kind of things. But I did not get involved in partisan politics until I was a senior in college, when I became an unpaid summer intern for former Congressman David Bonnier. We were introduced by a mutual friend, a former high school teacher of mine. And Bonnier is one of the most influential people in my life. Gave me a great opportunity, and I really got hooked on politics at that point. I did go off to law school, where election courses, political courses are few and far between, but I took a couple of them. But as much as I could in the summer at that point, I worked as a volunteer on political campaigns, including my then Congressman David Bonniers. But when I came back to Michigan after clerking for a couple of federal and state judges, I really began to get heavily involved in Democratic Party politics. I eventually became David Bonnier's lawyer, did a tremendous amount of volunteer work. I was a full-time union labor lawyer, but I also did a lot of volunteer work, managed campaigns, helped in a wide variety of ways. And I got active in the Democratic Party. I was president of my local Democratic club. I was chair of the Congressional District Party organization, treasurer of the county party organization, and just continued to accumulate, principally, almost exclusively volunteer experience on the political side. At the law firm, which at the time my mentor, Ted Sachs, was general counsel to the Michigan Democratic Party. So I worked with him, and we did a wide variety of things on behalf of the party, recounts, things involving the presidential nomination process and so forth. And I started to expand the practice a little bit. We did some work in the area of ballot questions. For example, candidates began to ask me to do legal work for them. And so it just grew from there. And eventually, when the party chairmanship opened up in 1995, I took a leave, basically, from my law practice and ran for and was elected to serve as the full-time chair of the Michigan Democratic Party. And that was the first paid job I ever really had in politics. all the rest of it up until that point, Bill, was as a volunteer. Very rewarding. I loved doing it. And the job of chair was also incredibly rewarding during the 18 years I was there. My favorite aspect, though, was probably working with volunteers. People work for political parties because they believe what the party stands for, or they believe in their candidates, and they do that as volunteers. And I felt part of my job was to support them, train them, help them in their volunteer work. And I traveled extensively throughout the state as part of that and got to know thousands of grassroots volunteers. That was a very rewarding experience as well. And many of those people are friends to this day, even though I've not been party chair now for 10 years. When I left being chair, I became a full-time election lawyer. I still do some union side work, not much. And I have clients across the spectrum of activities. I have PACs, I have unions, I have ballot question committees, candidates, and it's a full-time job the entire election cycle. Not the way it started, obviously, years ago, but now is a full-time job. Politics has gotten much more intensive and full-time as well. I still do some volunteer work for candidates who are favorites of mine. But principally my involvement now is as a lawyer behind the scene, helping people comply with the law and be effective in what they're trying to do.
But you've mentioned Bonnier, you've mentioned Sachs as critical people in your pathway to the chairmanship. And how about, were there issues? What motivated you to put this kind of life commitment into doing what to many people is the unheralded pick and shovel work that makes for success for a political party?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are a variety of sources there. And again, I want to stress just how blessed I've been. I had fabulous teachers growing up throughout public school, in college and law school, lots of mentors besides Bonnier and Sachs. And I try to pay that forward now in my career as well. But I think there are several sources that influenced me. First, as Merrick indicated in the introduction, I come from a union family. My uncles were teamsters, worked in the oil industry, the steel industry. I grew up in and around northern Indiana and Chicago, and that was the background. My family is working people. A number of them are farmers as well, but they're working people. And that was part of it. I saw that growing up. I think it's a piece of it. I also saw politics as a way to make change. I never really had an interest in running for office. My view was always that I think you can be more effective and help more people behind the scenes. I've been building a party organization, building a campaign structure and so forth. So that's spent my time in my life doing. I've had offers you should go to New York, you should go to Washington, D.C., and those are very flattering. And I'm sure that would have been a fine way to live my life. But when it comes to elections, I think the most important job is who gets elected, right? That determines how somebody's going to vote in Washington 90% of the time, who got elected. So if you want to be effective and elect the people you think are the right people, you focus on elections on the ground where they occur. I was also blessed, complete accident, and when my dad retired from the Navy, he and my mother moved to Michigan. Now, Michigan, when we moved here in 1970, this was not the hotly contested state it's become. And on top of that, we happened to move to Macomb County. Completely fortuitous. So I managed to move into the swing county and the swing state over the last several decades, and that provided lots of opportunities and education opportunities as well, as you learn what works, what doesn't work, and you deal with the rise and fall of politics, particularly in a swing county like Macomb. So, Bill, I think it was a multi-factor approach. One person that I do want to mention, though, is my labor law professor at Stanford, Phil Gould, who had worked in Michigan before. He worked for the UAW. He taught at Wayne State before he went out to Stanford. We still keep in touch. But when I was in law school, my attitude was I should explore these various areas of the law. I mentioned I took a couple of political law courses. I thought, I'm going to look at labor law. Given my background my family background particularly. And I fell in love with labor law when I walked into Bill Gould's classroom. He was a fabulous teacher. We still keep in touch. And that really set me off on that path. And they're very complementary in terms of Democratic Party politics in the state. The labor movement is a big part of the Democratic Party. So there was no conflict at all. And it worked out great. The two things I love to do in my life, I've been able to do in my life, which is protect the rights of working people and work in Democratic Party politics.
Just one last question. Clearly, a very successful long run as party chair of the Democratic Party here in Michigan. I'm going to ask you to maybe pat yourself on the back a bit. What personal quality do you think allowed you to build that party structure, which I think is the great legacy that you've left? What allowed you to, you talked about the energy level, just meeting hundreds of people and being a factor in their life. What made for success? What personal quality do you think was critical for your success as state party chair?
I think several things contributed to that. One, I had the long run in the grassroots, decade of being a volunteer, party official at several levels, lawyer for many folks. So I knew the party structure, the party rules very well. That was incredibly valuable. My legal background was also helpful in terms of understanding the election law and what the opportunities are. I think beyond that, the recognition of how important the grassroots are. One of the things David Bonner taught me, among many things, was how to work with ethnic groups and bring them into the party. When I started as party chair, there was a thing called the Multicultural Caucus, into which many ethnic groups were lumped. I tried to build, and I think did build, a variety of caucuses representing a wide variety of ethnic groups to get them involved in the party. And that really brought me a lot of joy to teach people about the party structure, how they can get involved, influence the party, run as candidates, and so forth. So I think that recognition was helpful. Frankly, a willingness to work hard. If you look at the successful state parties in the country on both sides of the aisle, they have full-time chairs. And particularly in a state like Michigan, 10 million people, competitive, up and down the ballot, you really need a full-time person, obviously assisted by capable staff, but it's not a part-time job. And it's not a job for the faint of heart either. Have a lot of internal party fights as well as the external party fights. So I think those are all really helpful things. Finally, what I would say is having some goal that even through the ups and downs over the years, here's what we're trying to do. And to build the party, its infrastructure everywhere in the state. For me, I was trying to make it as progressive a party as possible, even though there are limits on that. And when you're party chair, you don't read people out of the party, right? Elections are about math. In order to win, you got to get to a majority. They don't win by excluding people. You win by adding to the coalition, of figuring out how to do that with a wide variety of groups and individuals and make them be part of this broad, sometimes unwieldy coalition that is the Michigan Democratic Party.
Merrick, back to you.
It's interesting you mentioned Bill Gold. I had the pleasure of working with him in the past, and he is quite a distinguished figure in the labor law area. I share with you his significance in the field and having been a shaper of thinking. We're going to focus now a little bit on the nature and scope of the job of the chair of the Democratic Party. And what I'd like to ask you, you mentioned that it's a full-time job, at least as how you conceptualize it. Tell us a little bit about what you did. In particular, how I'm interested in, is it a paying job? And what kinds of duties did you perform? And what role did you play in raising money, and how big a part of that was in the overall scheme of things?
Yeah, so I was full-time and paid. I didn't get rich doing the job, but again, I think that's part of the ethos that one should approach such a job with. I made a living, and I was happy what I was doing, which was what was important to me. You can divide the job up into several broad categories. There's one I would call organizing, and that encompasses some of the things I talked about with Bill a moment ago. You work with local party organizations, candidates, and others who work at the state party level with the Democrats in the legislature and any statewide Democrats that may be there, including candidates. So there's a lot of just organizing work. We did a lot of training, particularly of local people and of candidates. And there's such turnover that you have to do that a lot. Every cycle, we would have a training program that we would do. A lot of that was in person. That was before we did a lot of things online. So there's that big aspect of it. I had a staff that assisted me with that whole effort. Communications is another big area. And that job varies depending on what's going on politically. For a good chunk of my tenure, the first 6 or 7 years, John Engler was governor. We had a Republican governor. Part of our job was to be the loyal opposition, right? And bring up issues, oppose the governor's initiatives, call them out if I was appropriate. And that effort would continue during campaigns. For example, when we elected Governor Granholm in 2002, she had to run for re-election in 2006. I became the chief antagonizer of Dick DeVos, who was the Republican candidate that year. That was part of my job, was to raise issues about him and attack in a civil and professional way his views and to assist the governor in her re-election. So communications is really important. That covers a wide variety of things. It can be press interviews, obviously websites, all the means of communication. And I had at least one communication staffer all the time. So that was one. Where you get a particular interest in fundraising, that's a big part of the job. You have to raise the money, the party organization going. We have staff, we have obligations to have conventions and other kinds of institutional requirements. So you have to raise money to do that. And then around campaign time, those requirements grow dramatically. One of the things I tried to do at the Michigan Democratic Party was make it a resource for candidates around the state. For example, and the Republicans do this too, but the political parties have one of the lowest bulk mail rates that's available to anybody. And so it makes a lot of economic sense for the party to do a lot of mail on behalf of candidates, as it saves them a lot of money. So we would structure ourselves in a way that we can offer that service to people. The way the Michigan Democratic Party is organized under our state laws, we can raise and spend a lot of money that candidates cannot. We could raise and spend money from corporations and from unions and use it for things like issue advocacy and other things that are permitted by law, things that candidates cannot. So that's another useful service to the candidates. I tried to make the party useful to candidates and to the legislative caucuses by providing these kinds of services that were unique to the party and help them in that fashion. And the same thing was true with federal candidates. There are a lot of activities that only a state party can perform in federal elections with assist candidates, and I tried to maximize those to help our Senate candidates and our congressional candidates. And all that takes money. Merit back to your question, either raised by me or in cooperation with these various candidates. And then the final kind of big part of this was at a campaign time. Michigan Democrats have traditionally run a statewide coordinated campaign. It's had different names over the years. Now it's called the One Campaign, where the party takes responsibility for assembling all the players, the leadership of the legislative caucuses, the candidates, all the supporting organizations, the coalitions, the ethnic groups, and others, assembling them into as cohesive as possible campaign organization to get the vote out, register people, and do all the kind of things that, again, the party only has a unique way to do. Candidates still have to win on their own. It's not a substitute for candidates raising money and doing their own good campaigns. But the party can do a lot of things to support them, provide a good foundation for them to run on. Those are a few of the major things. Obviously, we had conventions that had to be dealt with, particularly national conventions and the logistics and politics of all of that. Redistricting would occur every 10 years at the state and local levels. So that was always a special project. One of the things that the party became very focused on when I was chair, and I'm pleased to see it continue today, is the Michigan Supreme Court. I don't think people appreciated the impact that that court could have and has had. John Engler got it. He made a number of appointments to that court, and the court swung sharply to the right. And we started to focus on the Supreme Court more, and that's continuing today. The other thing we did a lot of were ballot questions. When you're the minority party and you don't control the legislature because of gerrymandering, the other option that you have in Michigan is to go to the ballot. So we went to the ballot. Things like protecting the minimum wage or increasing the minimum wage, voting rights and so forth. And again, I'm pleased that that has continued to be a focus of not only Democrats but progressives in this state. It led to reproductive rights being our state constitution. Several really big voting rights initiatives in 2018 and 2022, which has dramatically changed our voting systems here. So I think overall, Merrick, I would try to do an inventory. What are the tools available to a political party in Michigan, and tried to make sure we maximize the use of those tools to help Democrats win throughout the state.
It's very impressive how much thought you gave to the job itself and how you could tie all the things together in terms of helping the party statewide and at different levels, the state level, and the congressional level and presidential level. I'm interested in knowing, given how you're elected to that position in the Democratic Party, who is your ultimate boss, or who do you consider to be the person that you really had to satisfy if you wanted to keep that job? Was there any such entity or a person that was pivotal in this, or was it more diffuse?
I think it was more diffuse. Ultimately, you answer to the conventions at which you're elected, but those convention delegates oftentimes represent organizations. They may represent organized labor or any one of a variety of groups, the ethnic groups that I spoke about earlier. And as with any political job, it's a balancing act. I tried to stay focused on doing a good job and not be obsessed with the political consequences for myself. And my view was, if I do a good job, even if we don't win, then I can run again if I want to and have a platform to run on. Otherwise, you're always looking over your shoulder, right? You're always second guessing yourself and doubting. Now, it doesn't mean that I didn't have a lot of tough balancing things to do, because we do have competing factions in the party, fights over delegates, all kinds of fights, right? Your job is to mediate and resolve those, and sometimes you have to make tough decisions that people don't like. But I always tried in all aspects of this to be fair. If I was running a local meeting where we were nominating a new candidate and there was some kind of internal fight, be fair. Give people process, flavor them what's going on. They may not like what happens, but I think it was really important they felt they were treated fairly. And so I tried to do that as well. But America, it's a tough balancing act. There's a former Republican in the state, I think it was Pete Fletcher, and said this, longtime Republican leader in the state. He said, I'm paraphrasing here, we fight and kick and scream all day, then I go fight the other party. Because again, that's the nature of a party. You've got, thousands and thousands of people who've got all kinds of different ideas, and they clash a lot. And so you do that. You try to keep that stuff out of the public eye, obviously, resolve those things behind the scenes, unlike we see going on in the Republican Party now, where they have these terrible fights and they're all out in public. That's a failure of party leadership, in my view. That all that dirty laundry is aired in public. We had a lot of tough internal fights when I was chair, and I'm very proud of the fact that very few of them broke out in public. We resolved our differences behind the scenes, and then we united to try to win an election.
It's interesting how you talk about that, because I can just imagine what it must have been like being head of the Republican Party as Ronna McDaniel when former President Trump is your boss. And that must present a whole lot of challenges of a whole different order of magnitude. But thanks for that. I'm going to turn things over to Bill, who's going to focus a little bit on some of the challenges and opportunities in the positions. Bill?
Yeah, Mark, you've referred to some of the challenges, some of the successes, some of the setbacks. I'm wondering if there are, over a very long and distinguished term as party chair, if there were central challenges, if there were struggles that you saw that pervaded to the core of the party, or maybe just lasted a long time or continued? Were there any particular challenges that you take pride in the way you dealt with those challenges over your extended term?
There are some, but they're on both sides in terms of success and failures. Gerrymandering was a chronic problem. Before I became chair, along with Ted Sachs, we were often the Democratic Party's lawyers and redistricting fights. Started back in the early 80s and so forth. But the Michigan legislature was heavily gerrymandered in favor of Republicans in the 90s, the early 2000s, and even into the last decade until Voters Not Politicians put its proposal on the ballot, which passed. So trying to figure out a way to deal with gerrymandering was a chronic problem. There was no way to bring a lawsuit until recently, actually, after I left the party, and then the Supreme Court took that away from us. The U.S. Supreme Court took that away from us, said gerrymandering claims are non-justiciable. So that was a real problem. We rarely were in the majority of the legislature when I was chair because of gerrymandering. And that's where, Bill, we went to these alternative mechanisms, right? We would go and do ballot questions. Not easy. They're expensive, time-consuming. You can't put everything on the ballot. So we had to be selective in terms of those issues. And that's, again, one thing I'm very proud that the party and the progressive movement in the state still has that tool and uses it very successfully now. I'm very proud of that. I think another area that was really important was trying to figure out how to deal with the internal fights in the party. They happen. They happen. We have a very good process in the Michigan Democratic Party. There's an appeals committee appointed by the chair, has representatives from all over the state, and people regarded that as a fair system. They respected its decisions. And so again, it was a way to resolve these internal disputes without lawsuits and things breaking on the public. I don't think the Republican Party has that mechanism because these behind-the-scenes fights can be very debilitating and terribly consuming, as the Republican Party illustrates nowadays. I think we were able to keep that under control. My worst nightmare as party chair would have been what's going on in the Republican Party now, because it distracts you from your mission, which is to elect people. But I think that whatever mechanisms you put in place to keep the peace inside the party are critically important to your success as well. Just trying to think if the fundraising is always a challenge. The campaign finance system at one time was very heavily party oriented. But thanks to the United States Supreme Court, we now have super PACs. We have dark money groups that can spend money, and many of these groups in some ways have replaced parties, or they are substitutes for parties. And so the system is no longer party-centric. I think that has some real negatives in terms of it. But you have to make sure that the party remains relevant. I talked a little bit about this earlier, that there are still tools that only the parties have that can be used in the election setting that even these dark money groups and these wealthy super PACs don't have. And so, again, it's a constant battle as the laws change, as new phenomena emerge in terms of who can be active. I guess the final thing, and I'd heard of this earlier, would be paying attention to the courts. Perhaps that was partly attributable to my background as a lawyer. I saw what John Engler, from my perspective, did to the courts in this state back in the 90s. Radical shift to the right. I think we had a pretty fair and balanced court prior to that time. Radical shift to the right with his appointments. And it's possibly hard to beat incumbent Supreme Court justices in this state. It happens about once every 20 years. And incumbency designation is so powerful. But we did what we could. One, to push back. And again, election time, we did knock off at least one Republican incumbent during my tenure. We won a couple of seats. We never got a majority when I was chair, but we stayed in the fight. And again, I like to think I changed the culture of the party, and it grew to appreciate focusing on the Supreme Court races as well as all the other parties in office. Some successes, some failures, but those are the things that I spent a long time on.
I would say that clear success over that period of time. I don't see how someone could see it other than that. But I want to just one follow up on this appeals committee. What do you think gave it its continuing credibility? Why was it not perceived within the party as captured by one group or another? Or well, and that sounds. Did you create that? Was that?
Now, what I've acknowledged, I inherited that. And the way it worked was really great. It's a big committee appointed by the chair with the approval of the state central committee. And so the effort had always been to make it very broad based, right? Very diverse geographically and otherwise. And then my mentor, Ted Sachs, one of his jobs as counsel to the party was to be counsel to the committee. And the committee, if there was an appeal, would hold hearings. People could present evidence, right? Documentary and otherwise. You can get into rigid courtroom procedure, but people had a chance to have their say, right? And then Ted would work with the committee to draft a decision. And that decision would be issued and it would be enforced by the party. I inherited that, tried to maintain it. The lawyer for the party, after Ted passed away, continued to perform in that role. And she did a fabulous job of helping the members of the committee reach fair decisions. And again, issue written decisions that people can understand, right? They didn't think that all this faction of the party did me in and the appeal committee was rigged. I never heard that. People may have been unhappy with the result, but they always felt and they got a fair hearing. And that the decision of that body was not just yay or nay, a verbal one, but it was a detailed written decision that they could understand even if they disagreed with it. And I did my best to try to maintain that system and avoid the kind of chaos we see in the Republican Party now.
Thank you. Back to you, Merrick.
We're going to wrap this interview up with a segment that focuses more about your general views on the Democratic Party of Michigan. I'd like to ask you how well you think it's positioned for 2024, and if you had any ideas on what you think it might do to improve its position in that particular setting.
I think the current chair is doing a great job. This is a very difficult state to be a party chair in, no matter what party it is, because of all the competing demands and all the focus. Michigan could determine who the next president is, could determine who controls the U.S. Senate, controls the U.S. House. And obviously, we've got important elections for the State House and the Supreme Court here. So there's no easy election cycle in Michigan for anybody. You can't take anything for granted. I think the current party chair is doing a great job in that regard. But again, it's balancing. You've got a presidential campaign and a national party making demands, do these things this way. At the same time, this is not just about the presidential election, it's not electing members of Congress, not electing state House members. So you got to balance all of that and make sure that everybody's interests are served and you're not the captive of a particular group. And one thing that has happened to the Democratic Party and the Republican Party in the past is that they were regarded by particular governors, usually governors, and like their institution, their tool to use for their political purposes. And then when I left office, the party was left in a shambles because it didn't have the institutional structure to continue. One of the things I tried to do was, or sometimes this caused some tensions with some of our elected officials, was that the party has an institutional value. It's not simply there to serve political goals of one particular governor or one particular organization or one particular political leader. But you got to have the strength to say that, right, to them, not in a hostile way, but in a way that explains the value of a party as a strong institution that can serve. But one thing I do credit, and there's lots of things I credit the labor movement for in this state. The labor movement, I think, has always recognized the value of a strong institutional Michigan Democratic Party that works from cycle to cycle. And I credit them with that, for that understanding of the importance of having that institution. I know that's a very long-winded answer. I'm not sure I answered the question.
No, you did. It's very important. And I'd ask you to illuminate on a technical aspect of that that's always fascinated me is When you get into presidential campaigns, for example, the Harris-Walz campaign, does it run its own campaign in Michigan, or does it operate through the Michigan State Party?
Each presidential campaign has done that differently, but I mentioned before some of the advantages of using the party structure merit. And one of those advantages is having the party basically provide the field staff for not just presidential campaigns, but also U.S. Senate and congressional and even down ballot campaigns. There's a lot of advantages having that centralized. And that's what, I don't know what the Harris-Walz campaign is doing, but the model here has been use the party as the central place, particularly for field operations, canvassing, door to door, those kind of things. It makes sense economically. It makes sense in terms of cooperation and efficiency. Well, you don't need an army of presidential people out there canvassing door to door and not talking about the rest of the ticket. And the same thing, but you don't need an army of U.S. Senate candidate staffers out there just talking about the Senate race. We're all in this together. And that's what I tried to preach. And by and large, that has worked. People get it. Sometimes you have to wield a little bit of a hammer and say, look, you want the party's help, you want the party's assistance. We do it this way in Michigan. Candidates work together with the party to take advantage of all those things. Some candidates get that better than others.
I can imagine. Let me ask if there's anything you'd like to say as a parting remark to our audience about your role as chair or the position of chair in Michigan.
More broadly than that, Mary, I really do believe that parties are critically important institutions in American democracy. They serve as this intermediary, right? They build coalitions. And so we're doing, and the Michigan Democratic Party is not a cult of one person or one group. It's a coalition of people who have similar interests and try to achieve those goals together. And so I think it's really important. And when we have weak parties, I think weak parties have contributed to some of the polarization and some of the other problems we have now. Parties are by and large transparent in how they raise and have to spend money. Unlike a lot of these dark money groups, I think we're better off if money is raised and spent through the political party organizations as opposed to hundreds of millions of dollars through non-transparent organizations. So that's important, I think, to us as a democracy. And we have a healthy two-party system placed for minor parties, of course, but our system has been based on two strong major parties. And unfortunately now in Michigan and many other states, we lack that. And I say this as a partisan progressive Democrat, we need a healthy center-right Republican Party to make the system work. We don't have that now. And I hope at some point that returns.
Mark, Bill, and I'll let Bill add his compliments as well. I want to compliment you for a great interview. You've given us a lot of information about your journey into politics, the role you played, and the role of the Democratic Party in Michigan. Bill, anything you'd like to say?
Just thank you, Mark. Your normal eloquence was very much in evidence, and we very much appreciate your cooperation.
To our audience, we hope you've enjoyed this very much, and we look forward to presenting you additional episodes. And in one of our other episodes, we will talk to one of the former chairs of the Republican Party of Michigan. So thank you again, Mark, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you both for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it.